What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Invertcast, a podcast series talk about all things inverts, from husbandry and breeding and everything in between. My name is Jeremy. You may know me from the YouTube channel Jeremy's Wild World. I am your host, and I hope you guys enjoy listening to today's episode. So today's subject is all about mantis, and more specifically the top 5 mantis I've owned since being in the invert hobby. Now, although I've only been in the hobby for a couple years, starting off in November of 2019, since starting in the hobby I've owned a variety of species, and I have owned roughly about 20 species, and today I've compiled a list of the top 5 favourites, and I'm going to be talking about them today. Now, although I have made a top 5 list today, it's not to say that the other 15 I have owned I have not enjoyed. The mantis hobby is definitely one of my favourites to be in, definitely my top 3 within the invert hobby. I love everything to do with mantis. I love the fact that they come in all sorts of colours and shapes, from your lichen mimics to your stick mimics, flower mimics. It's fantastic, and that's what I love. I love oddity inverts, and Mantidae are definitely some of them. Now, I usually like to explain how these podcasts are going to work, but of course you guys probably know how a top 5 list works. We're going to start off with number 5 and then go to my top favourite of all time. We will also talk about some runners-up, as well as some species I would like to own in the future. Now, let's jump into the list by starting off with number 5, which is the giant Asian mantis, Hierodula membrancina. Now, you're probably wondering, Jeremy, that's a very basic species, and yes, we're not going to be talking about rare species. I have owned a variety of rare species, and I could have just done a list of rare species, but today's list is general, so mantis that people have access to regularly, as well as some rare and oddity species that you may come across, but very rarely, and hopefully that will change in the future with more people breeding them. Now, Hierodula membrancina is a very, very good mantis species to start off with. It was actually the very first mantis I got back in 2019 November at the Southern Invert Show in Brighton. Now, her name was Dice, and she was an absolutely gorgeous female, and I picked her up as an unsexed individual from, I believe it was the Cheeky Mantis. I can't remember, it's 2019, it's a very long time ago, but do feel free to check back at when I made that video. I will leave a link to that down in the description below if you guys feel like checking it out. And yeah, so giant Asian mantis, really, really nice mantis. So you want a large, really typical looking mantis. Big green mantis, they can come in other colours. I have seen like golden colours, but people believe that to be the Hierodula venosa. But yeah, so the Hierodula membrancina can come in a variety of colours, but typically you'll see them in green, and they're just beautiful, typical mantis that you would see. But although they look very generic, they're absolutely stunning, and the main reason why I found them to be a great mantis to own is because of this reason. Now, when I was trying to pick out a mantis when I was at the Southern Invert Show, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just looking at mantis because I've seen them on the TV when watching documentaries as a kid, and I just wanted a praying mantis. So I decided to go with the giant Asian, but I was actually considering picking up the ghost mantis, which I will be talking about actually next. Now, the good thing is that I picked up the giant Asian mantis is simply because of its appetite. Now, at the time, I did not know that the ghost mantis can be a finicky eater, and since owning a variety of ghost mantis, I can safely say they are quite the finicky eater, but we'll talk about them more later. The giant Asian mantis definitely does not have that problem. I had no troubles feeding Dice. The only time that she refused food was when she was going into pre-molt, or when she was just generally full. And that's really great for beginners, so if you guys are looking for a mantis that you are worried about them eating, you don't have to worry about with the Hierodula membrancina, and to be honest, the Hierodula genus in general have fantastic appetites. Now, would I recommend this giant Asian mantis? Yes, for beginners. And would I recommend them to experienced keepers? Yes. I definitely recommend the giant Asian mantis, the Hierodula membrancina, to anyone, no matter how experienced you are, just because of how they eat, how they look, and the size. If you want a big mantis that isn't hard to take care of, definitely have a look at the Hierodula membrancina. Now, we're going to move on to number 4, and of course I did talk about it, which is the Phyllocarania paradoxa, also known as the ghost mantis. Now, although they are really, really unique, really, really nice looking, and they're absolutely stunning, they're very, very common. And that's not a bad thing either. Of course, I'm going to be talking about common species today. Pretty much most of this list is common species, but the ghost mantis is definitely above the Hierodula membrancina just because of the looks for me. Of course, the Hierodula membrancina looks fantastic. It's beautiful, big green, typical looking mantis, but just the unique look and the really, really unique characteristics when it comes to the species is just absolutely stunning. and I've owned many individuals now. I think I've owned at least 5 different Phylocranium paradoxa sorry about that, guys, since being in the hobby, but I definitely love them for the looks, and it's nice that the males and females are sexually dimorphic. And what I mean by that is that they're very easy to tell apart from males and females. Now, you can do this when they're younger, which is also a great thing that I recommend if you guys are looking for a starter mantis, is that if you want a longer lasting mantis, because mantidae in general do not live very long, you can easily sex a female at around L3, L4 stage. Now, L3s and L meaning is just how many times they've molted since hatching out the oof. So after the 3rd or 4th molt, you'll be able to tell how to sex them, whether they're a male or female, just from the little crown, air quotes, crown that they have on their head, with the males having a more thin, bent crown, whereas the females will have a really thick, large crown. And other things I like about the Phylocranium paradoxa is that they come in a variety of colours, this being from dark brown, black, light brown, red, and the rarer green. I actually currently, as I'm making this podcast today, have a green female and a brown female, which is absolutely fantastic. It's going to be cool to see if the green will last to adulthood. Now, I know it can wash out over time, but it's debated on whether or not the green is a adaptability or whether it's genetic. I believe it's genetic because people say you can't get green males, but I've just seen a male that was green on Facebook, which was really, really cool. But yeah, so let's stop talking about that. Phylocranium paradoxa, why do I recommend them and why are they my favourite? First of all, for the coloration and the unique look. Second of all, it's very, very cool that they can be communal. Now, communal mantis is a very controversial topic within the hobby. Phylocranium paradoxa, people say you can keep them in communals, but what I've seen throughout the time of being in the hobby is that if you keep males and females together, the females will eat the males eventually, because the males will be flapping around before the females mature, and they are really prone to flying prey, as are most mantis, so the males will most likely get eaten by the females. But I want to try this in future. I'm not going to say it's full facts, but I will try to do a all-female communal, maybe with my own offspring. When I do produce some babies, maybe I'll keep like maybe 6 females back and I'll keep them communally and see how it goes by adding constant food in the enclosure, just so they don't resort to predating on each other. But yeah, so that's a cool thing about them if you are looking for a communal species, because I know within the tarantula hobby, the Monocentrepus balfouri are really popular when it comes to communals. So if you guys are liking the communal stuff, maybe try a ghost communal. I know other species are as well, but the ghost mantis definitely are a candidate for communal species. And also, it's just easy to care for them, to be honest with you guys. Keeping the ghost mantis, I found that they can withstand the fluctuation between humidity and temperature. Like, they're not as fragile as other species. They are very, very tolerant, but that's not to say to not keep them at an optimal temperature and humidity. Definitely try to as best you can. They say that the drop in humidity can affect coloration, but it's not proven. It's just theories and stuff like that. But yeah, if you want a hardy species, as well as the Hierodula membracina, both of them are very, very hardy. And yeah, so Phylocrania paradoxa, definitely recommend them for a beginner mantis, but just beware that they can be a little bit finicky when it comes to eating. Even if they're not full, there have been times where I've tried to feed younger nymphs and they just outright refuse the food. Do try to feed them smaller prey items when it comes to these guys. I forgot to mention with the Hierodula membracina that they are species of mantis that will tackle prey much larger than your typical prey item, but I found that with the Phylocrania, they're a little bit more shy, reluctant, more finicky when it comes to larger prey items. So do be sure when feeding to go with a smaller prey item. So that's number 4, the Phylocrania paradoxa. Let's move on to number 3, which is the Pseudocreobocha warburgi, also known as the spiny flower mantis. Now, where can I begin with this species? An absolutely gorgeous flower mimic species. I just have nothing to say about them, really. Just take a look at a picture of them and come back to me and say that that is not an absolutely gorgeous mantis. Now, with the spikes and the wing colours as they get older, with the greens and yellows and the eye spots that they get on the wings, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And what's great about them is that they're very easy to care for as well. I've owned many. I've owned males, I've owned females, and they are just very, very, very easy to keep. Typically, you'll keep them a little drier than your typical mantis. Most flower mantis species, or your creobotas, they like to be a little bit more humid, whereas the pseudocreobota, Wahlbergi, will like to be a little bit more drier. So that's a good thing. You don't have to constantly spray them all the time. They are quite the aggressive species when it comes to eating, so that's not a thing to worry about, unlike the Phyllocrania paradoxa. The fact that they are also a smaller species, which is great. So if you don't have the space for a very, very large mantis, like the Membrancina, the Orchid Membrancina, the Pseudocreobota Wahlbergi is a great species to own if you have a smaller enclosure, or you just don't have the space for a large mantis like that. Very, very easy to keep as well. I really, really enjoyed them, and I just love that when they are startled, they will do this like little shaky motion with their raptorials, this being the front limbs that they use to grab their prey. They will shake them around, and that's what, like, I believe it was one of the David Attenborough documentaries, don't quote me on that, where they showed baby Orchid Mantis. They called them Kung Fu Mantis because of their defense mechanism that they'll shake their raptorials, and it looks like a Kung Fu fighter. The Pseudocreobota will do that as well. But yeah, so they're an absolutely gorgeous species, a definite display in mantis. If you guys want something that will be like a little display enclosure, definitely an option is the Pseudocreobota Wahlbergi. Now let's move on to number 2, which is the Pseudocanthopus species. Now this is also known as the Mos Mantis, and I'm also going to add in a species I've only owned recently, which is the Asia Dodus Unidensis, also known as the Asian shield mantis. Now, number 2 and number 1 will have 2 mantis together, but this is only because I'm not very good at sticking to lists. I love mantis in general, and I couldn't not just stick to 5. I had to put tied species together, and number 1 will pretty much be the same thing anyways, just different colors, but that's a little spoiler, but we'll talk about that later on. So let's talk about Pseudocanthopus species. I believe there is one that's called the Pseudocanthopus lobivertex or lobatex or some Lopivez. I think it's Lopivez. Yeah, Pseudocanthopus lobivez. Don't quote me on the scientific names, guys. I try my best, but Pseudocanthopus will stick with that. So moss mimic. Now, more specifically, it's a lichen mimic, and I had the absolute pleasure of owning one from, I believe it was, Mantis Den. I have a video of me unboxing it back when it was my birthday, I believe of 2020. I think that's when the video came out. Yes, 2020. So I did get my absolutely gorgeous Mos Mantis, and safe to say, this thing was just fantastic. There is very little species in the world, and that's not just inverts, that will mimic lichen, just because of how difficult it is to get the body parts and the excursions, and I don't know how to describe it, like the bits coming off the body, let's just say that, to mimic lichen. And the Pseudocanthopus does it absolutely perfectly. I had a male. He was absolutely gorgeous, really, really well eating species, great appetite. Can be a little fussy when getting older. They do like flying prey, but I did feed terrestrial prey. But yeah, so an absolutely gorgeous species, and he did get to sub-adult. I was going to keep him for mating, but I did pass him on for a mating project. Whether or not that went successfully, I don't know, because the guy never got back to me on that. But nevertheless, Pseudocanthopus, a definite recommendation if you guys can find one. I know they do crop up here and there every now and then, and I know a few people have them at this time of recording the podcast. I know a few people that have them and have secured pairs. And I know one person has bred them recently, so maybe I'll be able to have the opportunity to pick some up again, and we'll talk about them in a video, or maybe once again in a podcast. Now, the number 2 other mantis that I was talking about today is the Asia Dodus Unidensis. Now, I was very, very lucky and very, very, very appreciative that a guy called Alan Wang, shout out to you, dude, gave me the opportunity to work with the species. I currently have a breeding trio, which is 2 males and 1 female. Males are sub-adult, whereas the female is pre-sub, but she is very, very close to molting, so hopefully she will be molting out soon. I would give some facts about these guys, but honestly, I've only owned them for a couple months, and I'm not confident to give information out about them just yet, but it's definitely a mantis I would recommend for experienced keepers. This is not a species, same with the Pseudocanthopus, simply because of how sensitive they can be. They require a lot more humidity and airflow than your typical mantis would need, like your beginner species like the Phyllocrania, the Pseudocreobota, and the Horogula membrancina. They are all very, very good beginner species because they can tolerate fluctuations. With the Pseudocanthopus and the Dodus, I've found that they can be a little bit sensitive, and they would really like to stick to a consistent temperature, consistent humidity, and a consistent airflow. But if you can nail those down, if you guys have had the experience with different mantis species, and if you do see these available, I definitely recommend picking them up. They're not the cheapest mantis in the world. Dodus I've seen go for £50 each. I paid for my trio $150 for a pre-sub trio, but that's £50 for L2/L3 nymph. So do look into that when considering picking up an Dodus, hence why I do also recommend them for experienced keepers, simply because of the expense. The Pseudocanthopus, not as expensive, £20 to £25 per nymph, but definitely recommend picking both up eventually. Now, we talked about 5 through 2, now we're going to talk about some runners-up. So some runners-up that I would like to talk about is the Cyanomantis Denticulata, which is the glass mantis, as well as the Sphingomantis Constrictor, the Indonesian double shield. So we'll start off by talking about the Cyanomantis. Absolutely stunning species. I have had the absolute pleasure of raising 2, which I believe are both female. Maybe one of them is male, I'm not too sure. But they're absolutely stunning. I currently both have them at subadult stage, and I have put them through a diapause state through their pre-sub stage. So whether or not I need to do it again as a subadult, I'm not too sure on that. But if you guys don't know what a diapause is what I'll need to do with the Dodus as well. So I'll talk about it briefly here. When it comes to a diapause in the wild, where they're from, I believe both are from China. So, of course, China will go through a winter period, and this is where mantis like the Dodus and the Cyanomantis will slow down. Basically, diapause is like a hibernation for bears, where they'll slow down their metabolism, so they slow down the molting and digestion, they don't eat and everything. They'll slow down, and for the next few weeks, they're not very active, and then when it heats up again, they'll molt to adulthood. Now, when it comes to the Cyanomantis, it's not proven, same with the Dodus, it's not proven that they need to go through this diapause state, but some say that if you don't put them through diapause, it will affect the genetics for the next generations onwards, when it comes to producing as many eggs in the oofs. But I will put the Dodus through a diapause state, but the Cyanomantis have already gone through a diapause state at pre-sub, because I did believe them to already be subadults at the time. So hopefully they will molt out fine, and we'll see how it works out when it comes to breeding them. Now, Cyanomantis are also very, very, the one thing I wouldn't recommend them for beginners as well is because they're very, very finicky. They're very, very quick. I usually open up the lids for their enclosures. They want to run out and run away, and they're very quick. And as well, they like smaller prey. I know people that own mantis have to feed fruit flies, and they're very happy when they can move on from fruit flies. But the Cyanomantis will stick with fruit flies until pretty much like just before pre-sub to sub-adult, when you can then start feeding blue bottle flies and green bottle flies. There we go, got that out eventually. But I fed them smaller locusts and smaller roaches, but I did feed them fruit flies predominantly as I was keeping them. I did get them at L3. So bear that in mind if you're looking into picking up Cyanomantis. You have to stick with small prey, and if you guys don't like working with fruit flies, wouldn't really recommend them to you if you don't like keeping them. Now let's talk about the Sphingomantis Constrictor, the Indonesian double shield. Now currently I have a sex pair of them. Both of them are subadults, so hopefully I'll be able to pair them this year. Absolutely gorgeous species. They can come in a variety of colorations, from brown to green to red to dark, pretty much black, I believe. But as they molt to adulthood, they get this really nice greyish silver colour, and they look really, really beautiful. I've raised a male to adulthood, I did have another female as well, but unfortunately she passed away at subadult stage. But I have managed to raise these two to subadults, so fingers crossed I'll be able to pair them up and get some babies out. I just want to say, guys, if I do breed some mantis this year, because I will talk this after I finish the list, I have been working with a few mantis species this year, so if you guys are interested and you are listening in the UK, I will have mantis available. Feel free to message me on my Instagram page, Jeremy's Wild World, as well as jeremyswildworld.sales. You can message me either or and ask me for lists when it comes to mantis, but they most likely won't be ready until the summertime, just because I have to get the ooze first, incubate them, raise the nymphs to about L3 stage, and then get ready to sell them. But yeah, so Sphingomantis, very, very easy to keep. A large species of mantis as well, if you are looking for that bigger mantis. Quite easy to keep as well. I find with the beginner species of mantis, once you nail down keeping that humidity, keeping that ventilation going, keeping the heat up, it's very, very typical to keep most mantis that way. Of course, adjusting for the drier species, spraying not as much. With the more humid species, spraying a little more. But the Sphingomantis is very generic mantis care. I keep mine at roughly around room temperature, which is 23 to 26 degrees Celsius. I feed them a variety of prey items. They're not fussy, which is a great thing about them as well. They'll take flying prey, they'll take terrestrial prey. They can take very, very large prey items as well. But yeah, so the Sphingomantis mini Constrictor, something a little unique when it comes to keeping them, because of course on the back behind their head they do have the little air quote shields. They have two of them, which is quite unique, and the colorations are unique as well. My female currently is green and my male is brown, whereas my previous pair was a brown female and a green male. So color variations are really, really cool. And yeah, so Cyanomantis and Sphingomantis, really cool species, as well as the number 5, which was the giant Asian mantis, Herodula membrancina. Number 4, Philocrania paradoxa, the the ghost mantis, sorry guys. Number 3, the Pseudocreabota Wahlbergi, the spiny flower mantis. And number 2, which was tied between the Pseudoacanthops and the Dodus Unidensis. Now we talked about those, now we can move on to number 1. Now I have, of course, as I said earlier, joined this together, but this is because they're pretty much the same. Now these, of course, is the Hymenopus coronatus / Helvia cardinalis, which the Hymenopus coronatus is the Orchid Mantis, whereas the Helvia cardinalis is the yellow Orchid Mantis, but I like to call them Banana Mantis. So let's talk about these guys. Hymenopus coronatus, the Orchid Mantis. Absolutely stunning species, and by far one of the most, if not the most popular mantis species there is in the hobby that is common. I remember back in 2020, early 2021, there was that TikTok craze where everyone was wanting Orchid Mantis. Everyone was rushing to get them. The prices for them skyrocketed, and I cannot blame them because they're absolutely gorgeous. If you've not seen an adult female Hymenopus coronatus, I definitely recommend doing so. I have a female right now, which I'm hoping to pair, and she is just absolutely stunning with the white, the pinks, and the reds that come on the tips of the wings, the browns as well, and the fact that they look like a walking orchid. I would say living, but orchids are living too. But yeah, they're absolutely gorgeous, and the males just as pretty with their bronze wings, absolutely stunning. I've raised multiple Orchid Mantis, and although people used to say that Orchid Mantis aren't a beginner mantis, I would say they are. Just spray them fairly often, give them good ventilation, and they're not a hard species to keep at all. I would recommend them, but please guys, just do not keep them in mason jars. You don't see it anymore. You typically saw it in the TikTok trend where everyone was keeping mantis in like mason jars and glass jars. I was like, how did that even come to play? But we're not ranting about that today. Just don't keep them in mason jars and you'll be fine pretty much. Helvia cardinalis, the rarer one of the two, pretty much the same as Orchid Mantis. They are in the same family. I believe it's Hymenopidae, but absolutely stunning. Smaller than your Orchid Mantis, so if you're looking for a mantis that doesn't get as big, definitely recommend the healthier cardinalis if you can find them. They are a little bit pricey as well. Can be roughly 20 to 30 pounds per nymph if you can find them available. I know a few people in the UK are currently trying to breed them, as well as myself as well. I've got 2 adult females, and it's just gorgeous yellow with the spots. They just look like a banana. That's why I call them the banana mantis. Absolutely gorgeous. Both when it comes to eating is not very fussy. They do prefer flying prey because they do sit on near fruit bearing trees or flower producing trees in where they're located in the world. They will sit by a plant and mimic a flower and hope that a flying insect will come by, but they will take terrestrial prey if you do wiggle it in front of them. They eat mealworms for me, they've eaten locusts for me, roaches. You might have noticed I have not mentioned crickets. Now, although this is a top 5 mantis species, let's just talk about feeding crickets just for a little bit. I used to feed crickets before. I'm going to be honest, I used to feed crickets a lot. Now, I haven't had any personal issues with feeding crickets, but that's because I always gut loaded my crickets with medicated food as well as vegetables before feeding them to any of my inverts. I don't feed crickets anymore just because I know there can be risks and I just don't want to take that risk with my animals. But people said that feeding crickets have killed them. There's bacteria in the cricket's guts that can harm the mantis. Also, apparently carrot, there's an enzyme in carrot that if a feeder eats it, can affect the mantis. I don't know if that's true, but I just stopped feeding crickets. Would I recommend feeding crickets now? No. But if it's the only option, I guess if you only had crickets on you at the time and you didn't feed them carrot, maybe. But anyways, let's just stop talking about crickets and we'll move on to carry on talking about the Hymenopus and the Helvia. So, absolutely gorgeous. Definitely recommend both of them as a species of mantis if you're looking for something different. Of course, everyone owns orchids, but if you can get your hands on a Helvia, I definitely recommend doing so. Care in regards to comparison to Hymenopus, that's the family, Hymenopus. Pretty much the same. Very, very easy to keep if you can get that humidity right. But yeah, that's pretty much the list, guys. So yeah, let's recap on the list. So number 5 was the Hierodula membrancina, the giant Asian mantis. Number 4 was the Phylocrania paradoxa, the ghost mantis. Number 3 was the Pseudocreobolgia wellbergi, also known as the spiny flower mantis. Number 2 is a joint tie between Pseudoacanthops as well as Dodus Unidensis. Pseudoacanthops being the lichen / Mos Mantis, and Dodus Unidensis being the Asian shield mantis. And number 1, a joint between Helvia cardinalis, the yellow orchid mantis, and Hymenopus coronatus, the orchid mantis. So that's my top 5 mantis. If you guys agree or if you guys have any personal favourites, I will be posting this on YouTube, so pop over to YouTube if you're listening to this on Spotify or Anchor, and comment there on if you have any favourites and why. And before we end today's podcast, I just want to talk about mantis I'd like to own in the future. Now, there's a lot of mantis I've owned. I've owned quite a variety. Currently, I've got Creobota, I've owned Ceratocrania, I've had a Rhombodera species, I've got Majuscula, Parasfendel, I've got Raptrix, I've got currently Pinapavonis, which is the peacock mantis. Also currently got, that's all I've got right now, as well as the Dodus, and I also have a Sphingomantis species, but I would like to work with some rarer species in the future, which would be like the Metallicus. If you guys haven't seen those iridescent bark mantis, especially the Metallicus splendidus, absolutely gorgeous. They're very, very similar to roaches in appearance, which is actually a fun fact. If you guys don't know, that roaches and mantis have a similar lineage in the evolutionary tree. They're very, very similar. Which is surprising when I found that out. I was like, but then I look at their faces and I'm like, yeah, I can see that they're related. But yeah, Metallicus splendidus, I would love to work with them, as well as everyone knows that the dragon mantis, the Peruvian dragon, the Stenophella lobovertex, absolutely gorgeous. I know a guy in the UK who's breeding them, which is, I believe, Sussex Mantis and Phasmids, as well as Alan Wang, who I got my Dodus from. He has some available at the time recording this podcast, and I'm really sitting here debating whether or not I want to get some, but I'm holding back just for now. But would love to work with them in the future because they're absolutely stunning, and it would be great to establish them here in the UK. That's one thing with these rarer species. Is the main reason why I want to work with them is, although they're really, really pretty and really, really cool, I would love to work with them to establish them in the hobby, to ensure that they don't leave the hobby again, because that's what you see with the rarer stuff. As I said earlier, if you can find Pseudocanthopsis, you can find Helvia cardinalis, get them while you can, because they come in and out of the hobby, and it would be nice to establish them so people can have access to them when they want to buy them. Of course, when you produce them. But yeah, so Stenophilalope vertex. I would also, there are some other species of mantis I would like to work with. More the ant mimics. So I have owned Raptrix, and I currently have Raptrix occidentalis, but I would love to earn like more ant mimics like the Constrictor mexicana. I believe that's one of them. Pretty much any other Raptrix species or a Constrictor species, I'd love to work with them. I would like to work with some of the more warmer species, which are the like what's that one? The Thistle Mantis, can't remember the scientific name for that, or the Devil's Flower, which is the Mantis diabolica. I did attempt to own these before, but due to me not having a heat lamp, I wasn't able to keep them warm enough. I was keeping them by a heat fan, but that wasn't enough because it would turn on and off. So I would like to get a heat lamp in the future and own some of those warmer species as well. And yeah, so those are the ones I can think of at the top of my head. Oh god, how can I forget Corododus? I would love to own Corododus starley, and Mitch, if you're listening, he's bred them here in the UK, which is absolutely fantastic. I would love to own some, but I know he's holding back his ones for now. But eventually I'd love to work with Corododus as well. And maybe, just maybe, if they ever come in the UK hobby, there's a species known as Toxidera. Now, there's one specific one I'd like to own, which is the Toxidera berrii. Absolutely stunning mantis. It's hard for me to explain it here. If you guys just Google it, Toxidera berrii, absolutely stunning. And I know one person on Instagram, Edis, he is the only one in the world to breed them. And if they ever come in the UK hobby, I would love to work with them. Absolutely stunning. But if you do want something that is similar to Toxidera, which is also a species I'd like to work with, is the cat eyes, which is the the H something, I don't know, I forgot the scientific name, but the cat eye mantis is actually in the Toxidera family, Toxiderinae. So if you want a Toxidera but it's not as pretty but still really, really similar, go for a cat eye. And that's also another communal mantis I'd like to try, is the cat eye mantis. I've heard that they are very, very successful, more than the Phylocrania. So if you're interested in communal mantis, look into cat eyes. I'm not going to talk about them today because I have not owned them yet. Will I own them in the future? 100%. But yeah, so I'm pretty much going on a tangent, guys. Today's a top 5 list. We'll end today's podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to today's episode. Really, really happy to finally get another episode out. This time I didn't go 2 months. I went 1 month off. But I will try to record these much more often now. It's more time have come up now because of work and everything. So fingers crossed I'll be able to get more episodes out. And I would like to get a guest on next time. But we'll look into that and everything. And yeah, so this is Jeremy from Jeremy's Wild World. Thanks for listening to today's episode. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care and peace.